Spring. The season of rebirth. When we put aside the anger and the bitterness of a dreary winter, and we look forward to fresh starts. Yes, baseball is back, my friends. The Philadelphia Phillies begin the 2017 regular season in 1 week. But here, right now, welcome, my friends, to the first Phillies Nation Podcast. Yo, Phillies Nation! Welcome to the first Phillies Nation podcast. My name is Tim Malcolm. I am the editorial director of PhilliesNation.com. Welcome to the first full Phillies Nation podcast. We are available on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on Stitcher, on Spreaker, on TuneIn Radio, on iHeartRadio, and on our YouTube account at Phillies Nation. You can find our website at PhilliesNation.com. We are on Twitter at Phillies Nation. We are on Facebook at Facebook.com/Phillies Nation. We're on Instagram at Phillies Nation. All over the place. Please check us out. We are so glad to have you here for the first full Phillies Nation podcast. We are 1 week from baseball, my friends. 1 week from Phillies baseball. This is the most exciting time of the year for me. I can't wait until opening day. It's going to be a great time. The Phillies playing Cincinnati at Great American Ballpark. Not a bad ballpark. I've been there before. But this is it. First podcast and 1 week from baseball. This is really exciting stuff. We have a great show today. We're going to bring in Dan Walsh of PhilliesNation.com to talk about the spring training, how the Phillies fared in Clearwater. We're also going to talk to him about the 2017 season, looking at how the Phillies might do this year. What's the worst that could happen with them? And also, what's the prediction? Are we thinking maybe an 81 team this year? Is it out of the question that they finish 500? I don't think it is. We're also going to talk with someone who is near and dear to our hearts, the former senior editor of Phillies Nation, and currently on CBS3 Eyewitness News this morning. Pat Gallen is coming on the show to talk about growing up as a Phillies fan and what it's like to be a reporter for the Phillies or of the Phillies when you are a longtime Phillies fan. Very interesting stuff that we had to talk about, plus the 1993 Phillies and so much more fun stuff. But I wanted to start first off today with the news that was obviously a major blow to the Phillies organization last week. Dallas Green died at the age of 82 on Wednesday, and it was very, very sad. We saw a lot of remembrances and a lot of memories over the course of a couple days. It's going to stay with the Phillies for a long time, obviously. Dallas was such a larger-than-life personality for the organization. If you had a chance, please read Jim Salisbury's piece. Jim Salisbury, longtime beat reporter of the Phillies at csnphilly.com, wrote a really beautiful piece about Dallas and his legacy. Also, they were really good friends, and that has a lot of that in there. You really get that emotion. Jim did a great job with it. He's a great reporter to begin with, but it's a really good piece. Please read that if you get a chance. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what Dallas Green means for Phillies fans, at least, what he means to Phillies fans. And recently we were doing the 50 greatest Phillies games of the last 50 years. In fact, today is the number one game. You know what it is. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wrote a lot of those pieces, and I wrote a lot of pieces about the 1980 Phillies. I wrote the piece about the NL East clincher against Montreal when Mike Schmidt hit that big home run. And I wrote a couple of the 1980 NLCS games when they played the Astros in that unbelievable series. I mean, that was great baseball back in 1980, and I talked with my dad about that series and where he was and how crazy it was and how good the Astros were. Dallas Green really was, I think, the main reason that team won those games. Yeah, the players obviously have to do their job, but Dallas Green's managing in that series and in the World Series was unbelievable at times, especially in that Game 5. He made a really great double switch late in the game where he took out the pitcher spot, and he put Greg Gross in the pitcher spot. And so when his spot came up in the order, surprisingly, Greg Gross had an opportunity to have a big hit. He laid down a perfect bunt that loaded the bases that really started off that Phillies' great rally in the 8th inning of that game. He also made an incredible move late in the game where he subbed out Bate McBride for rookie catcher Keith Moreland, which, I mean, think about this. This is Game 5 of the NLCS. It's a clinching game. It's a winner-take-all game. Late in the game, It's a very close game. And he takes out maybe his best player at the time, Jake McBride, for a rookie catcher. It's unbelievable. He made amazing moves, and they all paid off for him in that moment. And I think, to me, he's just the reason why the Phillies got over the hump that year. His moves were very sound. They were very smart. And he really didn't care what anybody thought about it. He obviously didn't get along with the players during that season. There was a lot of talk about that. But at the end of the day, he was the reason. His gruff, no-nonsense personality was exactly what the Phillies needed at that time. It was something that the Phillies and Philadelphia hadn't had in a leader, maybe even ever. So it was really very important that Green was part of that team. And he was, to me, the reason that they got over that hump. He certainly has a long legacy in Philadelphia. We're going to miss him, and the Phillies organization is obviously going to miss him. If you have any memories of Dallas Green, please share them with us at Facebook at Phillies Nation. We'd love to hear those memories. Obviously, spring training is coming to an end mercifully. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And we'll also talk about some of the roster battles that have happened over the spring with the Phillies. Obviously, Brock Stassi has been a big story for the Phillies. Will he make the roster? We'll talk about that with Dan Walsh in a little bit. Also, in 1 week, the season starts, and the Phillies will come up with a 25-man roster. They'll make those decisions over the next couple of days. But there's actual gameplay happening in a week. Jeremy Hellickson will pitch for the Phillies against Scott Feldman for the Reds. Feldman, who went 7-4 with a 3.98 ERA last year, mostly out of the bullpen for both the Astros and the Blue Jays, is getting the start for the Reds. So it's a very interesting opening day start. Really not the best, but it's opening day and whatever. Who cares? Baseball's back. It's going to be great. And I wanted to mention real quick that everybody kind of wants to see some progress with this team, right? We want to see this team win maybe 80 games, 81 games. Can we be a wild card contender at some point here this year? Anything can happen, certainly. This team can actually be a wild card contender, sure, why not? But it's not probably going to happen. It's more likely that they are more of a 75-win team. I don't see them winning 81 games. Certainly could happen, but they're going to need a lot of luck. Last year, their Pythagorean record, which takes a look at how many runs you scored against how many runs you gave up, was only, I believe, 63 and 99. It was the same record that they had in 2015. That means they're probably not going to be a lot better this year than you think. Maybe the 72 wins that they had last year was actually a little bit of a luck thing themselves. So maybe they might win 72 again this year. I think we'd all like to see them win a couple more games this year. 75, I think, is a really good target. We'll talk about that with Dan Walsh in a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. 81 wins, I don't know if it's a thing that they're going to be able to do. If they do it, they'll get a lot of luck. And they'll get some really, really good performances, especially from the prospects, I believe. J.P. Crawford, Nick Williams, maybe Jorge Alfaro, maybe some of the pitchers coming up. Who knows? But I don't know if this is an 81-win team. But I do think that Matt Klentak has had a really good offseason. We didn't really talk about this enough, but he made some really sound moves. Michael Saunders on that 2-year deal with $19 million. Of course, the second year, an option year. 1 year for $8 million. That's a really sound move for the corner outfield. If he fails, he fails. But if he doesn't, it's a really nice move. Howie Kendrick on the small deal, too, with that trade that they made. And then bringing in Clay Buchholz on a trade for a low-level minor leaguer. That was a very good move, I think. Even though Buchholz doesn't look that great out of spring, you know what? It's a starter who has a history of being a good starter for long stretches. If the Phillies can get 1 or 2 stretches out of him, that's a good deal for them, really. And Jeremy Hellickson, who did not reject that qualifying offer from the Phillies over the offseason and is here for $17.2 million, that's also a good deal. Hellickson is a really good veteran who wants to be here, wants to help the guys. And look, if he can get maybe 20 good starts out of the Phillies this year, we'll take that. It is season preview week at PhilliesNation.com. We have some great pieces on the site this week, starting with today's Dan Walsh piece on what's the worst that can happen with the Phillies. We'll talk to him later on in the show about that story. Also, we have an NL East preview from Corey Sharp. Kirsten Swanson gives us a farm system preview. And Mike Sadowski will look at what is the best that could happen with the Phillies this year. Yes, we will entertain our 85 windpipe dreams with Mike Sadowski later in the week. But the 50 greatest games also was finishing off today with the number 1 game. You know what it is, but I did want to mention that the reason why the 2008 World Series clincher is number 1, it was a really great game that took 2 days to finish. It was tense, and to me it had a lot of great moments. Chase Utley pump, fake, and throw. the Pat Burrell double, the Jeff Jenkins double, the rain in the early part of the game. Just great moments to remember forever, and that's your number one game. You should check it out at PhilliesNation.com. But now let's talk about the 2017 Phillies, shall we? Well, opening day is a week away, which means that mercifully spring training is finally coming to an end. And we wanted to look at how the Phillies were faring in Clearwater this spring and what we kind of took out of the spring. Dan Walsh is here from Phillies Nation to talk about a couple things. I wanted to start with, it's been a very quiet spring, thankfully. No injuries, knock on wood. But there have been some talks about the bench and the bullpen and the spots that need to be filled there. We're recording a week before spring ends, so things could change. But let's talk about the bench and the bullpen. First off, the bench. We know that Andres Blanco, we know that Aaron Altair will probably be there. 3 spots seem to be open. Who is on your bench going to Cincinnati, Dan?
Well, we still need a catcher. That's kind of indisputable. You need a backup catcher. And the name that people have been throwing around since the start of spring is Andrew Knapp. Mm-hmm. And so he hasn't had a great spring. He's had a lot of things to adjust to. But I still wouldn't be surprised to see them choose him just because you don't need the best backup catcher in the world when you're probably a sub-500 team. They want Alfaro to get the innings in the minors, so Knapp might be kind of squeezed out down there. So it might be a good chance to see how he does in the majors to kind of see if he sinks or swims.
Yeah, plus he's got the position flexibility, can play first base, can back up Tommy Joseph. I think the fact that it's his first camp and he's getting himself kind of settled, it gives him a little bit more room to grow a little bit and have some troubles in the spring. So I think that makes it as well. What about your infield?
The infield, I'm looking at Jesmuel Valentin as a possible utility infielder. Now, he plays predominantly second base, but he has played other positions in the past. I guess not with the success that you'd hope for, but he certainly hit pretty well in the spring. He's hitting, 350-something
355
this
in the spring, yeah, with a 429 OBP.
Yes, so that's great. If he can hit, you have Blanco there to be a defensive replacement, and then really you just need Valentin as a bat off the bench, occasionally spelling a guy in the infield.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's exactly what they would need. And then for position flexibility issues, you have Chris Coghlan, who they brought in, and he'd have to make $3 million if he makes the team this year. But do you think he makes a team even if they have a Valentin and a Blanco out there? Do you think they still want that position flexibility with Coghlan?
Yeah, it never hurts to have as much flexibility as you can have. I mean, really, that last slot, I only seeing it as a debate between Coghlan and Stassi, and Stassi's getting a lot of attention this spring.
Yeah,
but Coghlan really has more versatility than him, as well as he actually has that major league track record. And Stassi has really, really cooled off in the last week or two. He's gone, I think it was 2 for his last 18.
Yeah, people went really nuts for him in the first 2 weeks, and he kept saying, it's only March 10th, it's only March 10th, and now here we are, it's, March 20-something, and Stassi's now at 313 with a 365 OBP, 688 slug, still very good numbers, but they were otherworldly about 2 weeks ago, so obviously things happen, and people cool down, and, Stassi's one of these guys who, if he doesn't make the team, where is he going to go? There's not really any room in AAA. They're going to have to find a spot for him. But I think that's just a numbers game. He might be a guy who they might have to put on waivers or something like that at some point this year. That's an unfortunate thing, but he's just a little older and probably won't be able to get there. So I'm with you on Coghlan. I'm with you on Valentin, and I'm with you on Knapp. The thing about Coghlan is he's on the 40-man. He's not on the 40-man roster. If he doesn't get on the 40-man, if he does get on the 40-man, I should say. Who's off the 40-man because it is full right now? Who's the guy who's going to be left off?
Yeah, the names that seem most vulnerable to me in their position on the 40-man roster are Adam Morgan, Luis Garcia, and Alec Asher. And, none of them are seen as the most high upside relievers, the elite relievers, and that's kind of why they end up fringy on this roster. So Adam Morgan, he doesn't quite have the velocity where you ever will feel, I guess, certain when he's in.
Yeah.
I would worry about him becoming sort of what Brett Oberholzer was for us last year as a lefty long man out of the pen who kind of is used as a sign of surrender in that particular game. So he might be my pick, even though he has had a pretty good spring.
He has had a good spring. Morgan has a 2.35 ERA and 11 strikeouts and 4 walks in about 15 innings. Short sample sizes, but very good for him. And the bullpen itself, I mean, if Morgan is left off, that means he doesn't get on the bullpen, which means who gets in the bullpen. So right now, again, 40-man roster has a lot to do with it. Who would you put in the bullpen with their last 2 spots?
I'm thinking Luis Garcia has a fair shot at making it. I mean, every single season it seems like he's on that cusp, and we see him sometimes, and then he gets optioned, and then he comes back, and then he goes back to the minors. But, he has diversified his pitching repertoire this spring. He's had some success with it so far. He still throws heat. He throws 95 miles an hour, so you're always at least interested to see what he's working on. So I wouldn't be opposed to giving him another shot.
And do you think that Joely Rodriguez gets a spot as a lefty, or is anybody else? I mean, they just cut Sean Burnett. Pat Venditte is still on there, the ambidextrous pitcher. Who makes it?
I would see Rodriguez making it out of that group that you just mentioned, mostly because he's left-handed. I mean, he did fine in his very limited time last season. But, if they used him mostly as a lefty one-out guy, it would really, it would help his performance despite not having as much experience as some of these other guys. And I think that he'd do pretty well in that role. Yeah,
I'm with you on Rodriguez. I think he deserves it. And I know it's a numbers game, but there's something about me that kind of would like to see Pat Venditte make the team just because it's a novelty to have a guy who pitches from both sides, and it'd be kind of cool to talk about for a couple of weeks. But at the end of the,
listen, I would watch him every single time he pitched. I would watch. But
we'd all go nuts on Twitter and all that. It'd be great. So let me flip over here to who had the best spring, because obviously Brock Stassi had a really good start to spring, but overall, who do you think has had the best spring here in Phillies camp, and who are you most excited to see going into the 2017 season, whether it's in the majors or the minors?
Yeah, it's hard to pick just one, and it's hard to say two because, you don't want to pick based just from a stat line, really, especially in spring. But I haven't seen all the games, so I can't pick for many other reasons than that, really. So Stassi really cooled off too much to say it's him, although, good for him because he has kept himself from being overlooked, so that's a good outcome for him. Daniel Nava had a good spring, but I'm not sure that it will actually get him onto the roster. And then Scott Kingery turned some heads with his play. Aaron Altair has hit really well, and so that might be – Aaron Altair might be one that I'm most excited about because I think that he is such an athletic player, and he had a disappointing year last year. And now, I'm not saying that he has the most upside of anybody or anything like that, but he could be a considerable X factor for the team next season.
I thought his 2015, when he came out from being called up and hit all those extra base hits, he was pounding doubles and home runs. I thought that was a really good sign. He got the wrist injury last year, which really set him back. This spring so far, 283 with a 356 OBP. He's got 3 doubles, 1 triple, 3 homers, so he's hitting extra base hits. He's doing what he has to do. That is a really good sign, and I hope he makes the team. Well, he's going to make the team, but I hope he continues this into 2017 because, look, if they have any problems with Nick Williams or Roman Quinn or anything like that, they could potentially plug an Aaron Altair in for an injury, and he might be able to stem the tide or even be an everyday player as he goes along here because he's still relatively young and can have a couple prime seasons still in the majors. Dan Walsh, PhilliesNation.com. We will talk to you a little bit later on the show, but thanks for coming on to talk about the spring.
Thanks a lot.
Now it's time for our interview on the Phillies Nation Podcast. Our guest this week, I'm so glad to bring him in because he obviously has a history with Phillies Nation. You will know him from there, but if you even have never heard of Phillies Nation and somehow stumbled upon this podcast, you'll know who this person is. He's everywhere these days, and he's someone that is close to us, and we love him. And, of course, it's the man, the myth, the legend, Pat Gallen. Pat, welcome to the Phillies Nation Podcast.
Tim, did you just use legend with my name?
That's right.
I'm humbled by that.
I called you a legend. That is right. Pat, as we know, he is right now on CBS3 Eyewitness News this morning as a feature reporter. And then before that, you were a Phillies Nation editor from 2010 to 14, Phillies Nation TV host for 3 years. You've been everywhere, the Fanatic in the past, and now you do some spots on WIP. Have I forgotten anything that you do these days?
I think you got it all. You went through quite a bit there.
Yeah. I mean, you're a busy guy, and I've seen a lot of your clips online. I mean, I don't live in Philadelphia. That's a spoiler for everybody who's listening. But I see a lot of your clips online, and you seem to, I know people have said this in the past, but you seem to have a lot of fun doing your stories. First off, how did you get the job at CBS? How did that all work out for you?
Yeah, so you mentioned the timeline of events when we did Phillies Nation TV, which ran for, I think, 3 years. It's such a blur at this point. I don't even, it kind of all blends together. But yeah, I think it was 3 years of Phillies Nation TV. So I was editor-in-chief, and then I hosted the show with Corey Seidman. We were on Comcast Sportsnet, and I started to do more with CSN, doing Breakfast on Broad when that first launched, and doing some Philly Sports Talk or whatever that show is called now. And then that sort of extended into doing more freelance stuff with Fox, and I did some of their Eagles pregame shows. I did Good Day Philadelphia for a lot of years. And when there were some changes at CBS3, I heard about some things that were going on, had a friend there that was a producer, and basically got my tape over to them. They knew who I was from doing TV and radio in the market for the last few years, and they decided to bring me in for an audition. And that audition went about as well as it could go. And with all the changes, they really needed people in place as quickly as possible, and they felt that they could trust me. They liked what I brought to the table. They liked my audition tape, and the rest is history. That was June or July of 2015. So I'm almost at the 2-year mark with CBS3, and I've really gotten to do a lot of fun things, as you mentioned. It started just doing part-time sports where I would anchor when needed, I would report when needed, and that evolved into doing, 5 days a week, and then that evolved into being moved to the morning show because there was a need for someone who tells fun stories, who can kind of be a chameleon, move from sports to telling a cool story outside of sports, something about the city or something about high school kids, whatever it might be. So I guess they decided, hey, he's pretty good, let's move into the morning show, and the rest is history. So that's where I'm at right now. It's a lot different than when I started almost 2 years ago because, when you're part-time in this business, you never know how long it's going to last. I have to say I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world because not only do I get to stay in my home city, I still get to do fun sports things. I get to tell great stories about our city and about the great people of the city, and I get to do it every day. Now, it's an early wake-up, but other than that, not much to complain about.
You mentioned you're a Philly guy, born and raised in the Northeast. Where in the Northeast exactly?
I grew up in Lawndale, and I went to J. Hampton Moore Elementary School on Somerdale Avenue, and then I went to Wilson Middle School and then Northeast High.
Yeah, of course.
And from there I went to Westchester. So, yeah, I grew up in Northeast Philly, Lawndale, Burholm area, and worked my way up to Westchester.
It's pretty amazing that you've been able to stay in, and like you said, it's amazing that you stayed in Philly the whole time and your family's here. What's it like when you're you're home all the time, basically. You see your family all the time, but are they commenting on the stories that you're doing that morning, or do people? What's the daily thing like for people who know you and have known you forever?
It's fun. Yeah, it's funny because I get messages all the time from people saying they saw me, and I've told the person who you are, and I get text messages from my parents every morning basically saying, oh, we saw you do this, it was so great. Now, my parents think everything I do is great. That's why they're your parents, so I can get away with it from them. But yeah, it's pretty neat. It's pretty neat. I have a really good fan base, and I throw that in air quotes, but my parents have been outstanding. And I think that is a reason why CBS saw me as valuable, is because, hey, you're right, and you mentioned it. I do have an intricate knowledge of the city, and not that the people who have gone and come back don't have that, but I've been embedded here. I have family with deep roots here, and I haven't left. So I know the sports scene here as well as anyone. So that does add some value. And then if you're looking for people to continue watching the show and for ratings, hey, it doesn't hurt that I've grown up here and I know a lot of people and have a lot of friends and family here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go into the Philly stuff because I want to really kind of get your sort of story in about growing up, and especially growing up in Northeast Philly and your first memories and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you were a Phillies fan from the jump. What's the first thing you remember being a Phillies fan?
My first thing I remember being a Phillies fan was when I got a starting lineup figure of Tommy Herr. So that was like 1989, 1990s. I'm like 5 or 6 at that point. When it really blossomed was obviously, you and I are around the same age, was the 93 Phillies. I was 9 years old when that team just came out of nowhere. And as a diehard fan as a kid, when something like that happens and you can latch onto it, that is special because you always have that to fall back on. And that 93 team was just so special for in so many ways. As crazy as they are, and as a bunch of lunatics that they were, you didn't realize that at the time. You're just going with the flow of it being, you're a 9-year-old kid, your team that you love is winning every night, you're getting to stay up late, you're getting to watch playoff games. It's something that you've never seen before. So my earliest memories are of Dutch, are of John Kruk, are of, Kim Baptiste, those great names. And, of course, of Harry and Whitey was the soundtrack of my childhood and your childhood and a lot of people's childhoods here in Philly. So I've got great memories, even though a lot of those teams weren't very good. Yeah, I mean, every summer, Saturday, Sunday, we're barbecuing in the yard, and we've got the radio on listening to Harry. So many great memories mixed with so many terrible memories of bad teams. But when you look back on it 25 years into the future, 20 years into the future, it's still kind of cool.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the 93, and we're about the same age, and I thought about it. I was 9 years old the day that the Phillies played Game 3 of the World Series, and I actually went to that game, which was one of the coolest days of my life. But I was, 8, 9 that year, and I have a theory that it's like the perfect age to be a baseball fan because you're so young that everything that happens on the field is still new and a discovery, and it's really neat because, oh my God, I've never seen it before, and it's bigger than life. And you're not old enough to where when you're older, you start to analyze the game and you start to kind of get disappointed more and frustrated more, and you start to worry about the grind more. But when you're like 9 years old, everything is like in a perfect position. And that team, it was like a bunch of superheroes. I mean, there were like cartoon, oversized, the posters of like Lenny Dykstra with the nails, and this Dutch was like this oversized, muscular guy. So Peter Cabilia, they all were kind of like larger than life, buffoonish, Saturday morning cartoon characters who just happened to hit the ball hard and well and did it for 6 months, which, I mean, it's like the perfect storm. I think we were lucky to have grown up at that moment, in that summer, to have that team as our team.
I agree. And I actually went to Game 5 that year, and I think everyone in Philly has a story of, getting to a World Series game, and, you and I were lucky enough to have been to at least one of them. I just remember sitting all the way up in the 700 level, and my dad brought binoculars, and we could barely see. I think Ricky Henderson and Devon White were in the outfield, and you could barely see them with binoculars. So, yeah, cool stories from the World Series. But you're right. Yeah, it was the perfect storm. And looking back on it, it's like, well, these guys, most of them admit to have taken steroids and things like that. But at the time, you're blind to all that. And it continues to be special. To this day. I will say that even at that age, it was sort of in my wheelhouse that I was beginning to play the sport, and I was taking to it like a lot of kids who were 9 years old. And that team, it's kind of funny because they weren't really that. It was a 1-year thing. They weren't really that good outside of that. But to have a team that does come out of nowhere and do what they did, I think makes an even bigger impression on you.
Yeah, and there was like this infusion of baseball fans that came out of that team. There were so many boys and girls who are our age who they will tell you that 93 was the year that they became huge baseball fans. And we were the people who were in our early 20s in 2008, and we went to those games. When they were filling the ballpark every day, we went to those games. So, you're right. I think that 93 team had such an impression on everybody in the city.
Well, I will say that as quickly as that came and the joy that we all felt, then the strike came, and I just remember being so heartbroken because that was the following year, right? That was 94 was the strike year, and I just remember being so upset because I had just latched on to this team, and I had become a super fan, and not only of the Phillies, but when you're watching ESPN, because really that was the only thing you could see all of the teams with. You're watching Ken Griffey Jr., you're watching these stars across the country, and you're latching on to them as well. And that's really when I became, right around that time, 8, 9, 10 years old, was when I knew that this is what I wanted to do. Not necessarily be a professional athlete or a professional baseball player, but just be in sports, because it was everything across all the leagues making such an impression on me. And then 94 was such a downer, just knowing that they were going to strike. And I remember it taking a couple of years, and obviously with the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa thing, that's when everyone came back. But I just remember being heartbroken for a couple of years, like, you know what? They left me at the time when I became the biggest fan. I'm leaving them. And it took a little time to jump back on the bandwagon. And the Phillies weren't that good anyway, so it did make it a little bit more tough over those next few years.
Yeah, they were trying to sell us with Heathcliff Slocum and his All-Star bid in 1995 or whatever year that was. But did you go to any games in 93 other than the World Series that you remember, or any games during that period of time that stand out? There's always weird games in those 90s, when I saw 2 grand slams in a game or that kind of stuff. Was there anything like that when you were growing up?
I remember it was 98, the year we went to see when the Cardinals came to town, Mark McGwire. We had tickets in the 700 level. And I probably still have photos somewhere from way up yonder during batting practice, because that place was probably 40,000 deep when he took the cage. So there were those games scattered throughout. I remember making a sign at the vet, and it made it to television, and they made us take it down and probably said something dirty on it, when you're a kid, high schooler. But yeah, there were some lean years in between. But you always have those fun games. You remember, you're right. That's one of the funniest things, because when you're growing up, one of the biggest goals in life as a kid is to get a sign that is put on television at a sporting event. I used to make poster board. I would go to the pharmacy down the block and get poster board and make a sign, and then we'd go to the game that night, and it would say ESPN, whatever the heck you were trying to say on it. But yeah, those were the days when you could go to the vet for $5 and take up an entire row and put your signs out there and just be an idiot. But it's totally different now. It's kind of neat to be able to reach back and go, we at least had that growing up where we could be kind of fools in Veterans Stadium. And of course, part of me misses that, because now I get to see how the sausage is made every day, having covered the Phillies for a couple of years and having been in the locker room every night, having been up close and personal with a lot of the players. You almost wish, the sports fan in you wishes that you didn't see that, because now I don't watch the games in the same way that I used to, because life takes over and there are things that are much more important than that. But if you can look back with fond memories of your childhood with your favorite team and your favorite baseball team, at least you've got that.
Well, that leads me then to what you were doing. So you started working at Phillies Nation in 2009. I believe it was 09. Maybe it was 08. It was 09. It was 09. I think
it was 09. Yeah, it was right after they won.
I actually remember when we brought you in, because Brian Michael, who's the founder of PhilliesNation.com, he emailed and said, we have this guy, Pat, and you were at Examiner.com at the time. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
I remember that. The Phillies Examiner. And I read your stuff, and I was like, all right, he's not bad. And then I saw your picture, and I thought to myself, we can't have this guy on the site. He's too good looking.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I appreciate that.
Well,
I'm only there because of you, really, because of you and Brian allowing me to join, and the rest is history from there. So I appreciate that.
But even then, I knew, like, I saw your picture, and I saw that you were, like, a more than competent writer about the Phillies, and I was like, this guy is going to be better than me soon enough. He's going to have a better job. He's going to find his way on CSN one day. No, I honestly was feeling that at the time, and it worked out.
You, my friend, have always been and will always be a better writer. Looking back, I'm like, how did I write some of the stuff I did? It was all, I have honestly no idea. I wish that I actually still wrote like that, because it does teach you, it does set you up for things like I'm doing now. It helps you write good packages, and it helps you, as crazy as it sounds, it helps you when it comes to radio. And I've sort of lost that edge because I haven't done it in so long. But, dude, come on, stop it.
No, we don't have to go into that, but thank you. But when you were doing Phillies Nation, you started to write about the Phillies basically every day. And while you weren't in the clubhouse and you weren't talking to players or anything like that, you did have more of an innate knowledge of the team and what was going on. At that time, did you start to see like a change in your fandom around that time, 2009, 2010, or was it still the same?
Yeah, it changed, and out of necessity, because once you step over that line, you really can't step back over again. And knowing what I wanted to do with my career and having it progress the way that I was hoping that it would, I knew that I was going to kind of leave that fandom behind. But it happened so fast. I start writing about the team as a blogger, and then you're with Phillies Nation. But once you get to that level, and Phillies Nation, it was the slogan, but it's more than a blog. It really is. It connected you with the fan base, but you're so close to the team, even though you're not in the locker room. And then I was lucky enough to get a job with 97.3 ESPN Radio in Atlantic City. And they knew what we had at Phillies Nation was a good thing, and they wanted to link up. They wanted to connect the two. And with that, I was able to get access to the locker room. And I knew right there, it ends. You have to be professional about it. If you want your career to go in a certain way, you just can't walk into the locker room and be the world's biggest fan anymore. You've got to put your game face on. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to do because you're at a certain age, you're 24 or 25, whatever it might be. And you understand. You understand that first and foremost, baseball is a business. And what we're doing was a business in a sense as well. I mean, let's face it, we weren't making millions of dollars by any means, but you're trying to get by, you're trying to build the brand, and you're trying to make something of it. And, as soon as I started covering the team in the locker room, I think 2010 or 2011, that all sort of ended. And it sucks, but that's life.
Well, you sort of answered my question there, but, you also started covering the team really as it was as good as it's ever been as a Phillies team. So, it sounds like obviously you were fine with it because it's work and that's what you wanted to do, and that's what your mission was to get to that point. And you knew you had to be more objective, but still, it's a 102-win Phillies team that you're covering. You must, part of you. I was not doing anything at that time. I was just doing my regular job, and I wasn't doing any Phillies writing, so I could enjoy it. But you had to feel something like wow.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You still feel pride having been in the city through all those lean years, and even though not every day that I was in the clubhouse was it a good day with certain players. There are egos. Everybody knows that. But when you step back, and even though I was up in the press box, when you step back and you see the joy that team brought, and where you've been as a fan and where you are at that point, I still felt genuinely good about the team. And when there are guys like Roy Halladay on that team, and Ryan Howard, and Carlos Ruiz, and a lot of those, even the secondary guys who didn't get as much play. Brad Lidge was amazing in the locker room. When you have guys like that, it makes it that much easier and that much more fun. And I have so many fond memories of those great years. One being where I was in the press box for Roy Halladay's playoff no-hitter. And I'll tell you what, anyone who says they were not nervous or were not shaking in that press box is a liar. Because I was as nervous as anyone else. The guy next to me was the same way. It just
who was the guy next to you? Who was the guy next to you?
I think it was Mike Gill, actually, from 97.3.
Okay. Yeah.
But I guarantee you that 90% of the people in that press box were just as nervous, because that's the competitor in you. That's the athlete in you, understanding that what you're seeing in front of you is historic. So
it's been done once before. I mean, and this is the guy's first playoff start. I mean, really, it was such an amazing story. It was an amazing.
If you could bottle up what I felt in the press box that night, and you could take that out whenever you wanted, it was mind blowing. It was mind blowing, and it was night after night of that. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be there for that playoff no hitter. I was lucky enough to have been. I was in St. Louis for that Squirrel game. I got a credential, went out there. So even though it didn't go our way,
it wasn't. It's nothing to do with the Squirrel. That had nothing to do with the Squirrel.
Oh, of course it didn't. But you'll always remember it as that.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's transition from the great days to the 2017 Phillies. This is, look, it's actually not that big of a team this year, I don't think. But how much do you follow the Phillies right now? How much you kind of invested in what they're doing? Are you able to keep up on some things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, my bedtime right now doesn't affect it, but it will once those games start at 7 o'clock, because I'm in bed asleep before 8 o'clock every night. So once spring and summer rolls around, I'll catch the first couple of innings and then I'll head to bed. But I'm like anyone. I'm very bullish on what this team has to offer, and hopefully in the next year or two, it really all starts to come together. From a deep prospect perspective, I don't know that I'm there with a lot of other people just yet, because it takes me a little bit of time, because I'm kind of behind on my schedule. But yeah, there's so many things to like, not only about the team that they'll put out there this year, but hopefully in the next year or next 2 years.
So what did you think about some of the moves they made in the offseason? They got Howie Kendrick, they got Michael Saunders, Clay Buchholz, they brought back Jeremy Hellickson. Did you think that this was a good plan to kind of fill in some gaps for a couple of years, or did you want them to go bigger? Did you want them to not bring in anybody and just bring the prospects up? Where do you think?
No, I think I was okay with Matt Klentak's moves, and you can almost use the whole trust the process slogan with the Phillies too, because
everybody now
Yeah, I know it's kind of being played out, but with the Phillies, he has made it known, and since he got here, that there would be a process in place and they wouldn't deviate from that. So I like that they haven't broken the bank for players that they don't need just yet, that they're starting to figure out what they have in those fringe guys that are sort of pushing their way onto the roster. I like Howie Kendrick. I mean, he's not the same guy that he was 5 years ago in Los Angeles, but he's still, as you would say, a professional hitter. I think it's a good move to solidify the lineup in that way. Saunders, good 1 year flyers on these guys. Hellickson obviously is making a lot of money, but for 1 year you can deal with it, especially knowing that the roster itself probably makes about as much as he does. So I don't have any problems with it. I don't have any problems with the moves they made this offseason, and a lot of the guys they're bringing back there's something fun about guys like Cameron Rupp and Tommy Joseph and Blanco and Galvis. Like they're not great by any means, and even I think they know that they aren't great. But if you can put them all together, maybe you get something a little bit special out of it. I'm not saying playoffs by any means, but maybe you start to break toward the 500 mark this year.
Let me get a record from you. What you think the Phillies are going to finish with? What's your final record going to be at the end of the year? Just ballpark it.
I would go. I'm feeling like 78, 79 wins is possible if Buchholz pans out. If they can get a bunch of innings from him and Hellickson, and then Franco's, he's got to take the next step. I think that they can potentially be a high 70s win team. I wouldn't go further than 500. But again, if everything comes together with some of these guys, you have the potential for that. And I say special again in air quotes, but that special kind of year where they exceed your expectations.
Yeah, I think 78, 79 is probably on the higher end of what I think they might do. But you're right. There is that possibility for something that's to happen, but there's also the possibility for them to be another 68 win team or something like that again. So
right, and by magic I mean like 83 wins. I'm not not 90 win team, but
like we're still watching with bated breath on September 10th, maybe something like that.
Right. If I could get good baseball through the end of July, I would take even mid-July. All-Star break, they're still kind of hanging around. I'm in. I'll take that.
Okay. No, I think that's possible. I think that is possible. You can find Pat Gallen on CBS3 Eyewitness News this morning, every morning, Monday to Friday. Typically, you're doing something and it's fun and you're having a great time. And sometimes you'll be on WIP, filling in a little bit here and there. And all the time, you're a great guy, and it's really nice to have you on, and I thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about the Phillies and 93 and all the cool stuff with me. So thanks, Pat. I really appreciate coming on.
Tim, no, I appreciate you asking me, and it's always fun to be back and connected with Phillies Nation, where I got a good start in this business thanks to you and thanks to Brian and thanks to Phillies Nation TV and all the great people, the thousands and hundreds of thousands of fans we have on Facebook and Twitter, whatever it might be. So I really appreciate it. Thanks, Tim.
Well, with the season opening in 1 week, we obviously want to preview and make some predictions and talk about what we hope will happen with the Phillies in 2017. I got Dan Walsh back with me from Phillies Nation, and he wrote this week, you'll see it on the site this week, about what's the worst that could happen with the Phillies in 2017. It's a very interesting piece. And Dan, what's the biggest thing out of the piece that you wrote that really needs to happen for 2017 in order for the Phillies to show that this is a team that is getting better?
Yeah, really, we just need to know more next year than we do today at this time, because the Phillies have a lot of ways of solving problems, even current problems with the roster, problems that might come up. They have a lot of depth. They have a lot of different guys. They can fill different positions. They have a lot of money that they can spend if they choose to. Mm-hmm. But they need to know how to actually use those resources in order to get better.
Yeah.
So the role of this year will be clarifying some of those issues, deciding what the biggest problems are, deciding which problems maybe won't be solved internally. So it's kind of a big picture potential problem right there.
Yeah, I mean, they've set themselves up really well because they have all the depth that you mentioned. And, I'm just looking at the outfield situation, the starting pitching situation, because I think that's where it really does help. And I've looked at, how last year's outfield on opening day had Cedric Hunter on the opening day lineup. Cedric Hunter was in the opening day lineup. This year, you have Michael Saunders, you have Howie Kendrick, and sure, they've had poor springs, but that's such an upgrade from Cedric Hunter and Peter Burgess and Tyler Goodell. And Tyler Goodell, I mean, he's someone who could actually be off the organization in a week or two or whatever. That's unbelievable that they've made that kind of progress. So as bad as it could happen for the Phillies this year, what is really bad? Like if Armageddon strikes here for the Phillies, like what's the worst? Is it like a 60-win team? Is it a 55-win team? I mean, it can't be that bad. They've set themselves up so well.
Really, to me, Armageddon is any record that's worse than last year's record. It's time for, really just for the fans' morale and for their belief in the system going forward. It's time for the fans to see some of these things taking shape, to really have the ability to believe that things are getting better. Because you and I agree that they are. On paper they are, all these sorts of things. But it's time to start to see that and actually be able to, to watch it happen. So any record that's worse than last year's record would be pretty damaging to the team and to their fan base also.
Even though the Pythagorean record for the Phillies last year was actually closer to the 2015 record, and if they did have a 70-win team, it would be an improvement from their Pythagorean. If it was a Pythagorean 70, that's okay, or that wouldn't be good enough. You'd need to see a tangible, on paper, 73, 74, 75-win team.
I think that most fans would need to see. Most fans aren't actually as interested in the Pythagorean outcomes.
Yeah.
And so they wouldn't take solace in that fact. And so if my concern is in a team that becomes a better on-field product, and is one that more people are excited about, then it has to happen in the way that most people are actually accessing the team and understanding the team.
Sure.
So most people go more based on on-field results rather than, projection models and things of that nature. So yeah, I do think that it has to actually surpass last year's record and not just last year's talent level or Pythagorean.
Okay, so let's get better this year. Okay, so let's talk about what can get better here for the Phillies. We look at Maikel Franco last year and how he struggled. And we all believe that working with Matt Stairs is going to help him, and maybe not being the focal point of the offense a little bit more is going to help him. You see Tommy Joseph getting a full year of work. You see the corner outfield obviously improving from external places. You see Cesar Hernandez having a great second half, and that could carry over this year. Where do you think in the Phillies sort of offense, first off, is the best, most likely place where they're going to improve at a tangible level?
So do I have to pick one player or one position?
You can pick whatever you want. I don't care.
No rules, huh? Yeah, I think that Franco, for me, is at least the player that I'll be watching most closely.
Okay.
Because I think he is a much better player than he was last season, that he could be an all-star caliber player in many years of his career.
Wait, in a league where the other third basemen are Chris Bryant and Nolan Arenado and whoever else is out there?
Yeah, I mean, somebody from the Phillies has to go, right?
That's why it's always, last year was Odubel, but I would, you'd expect it to be Hector Neris or something this year. But go ahead, continue about Franco.
No, but I just mean in terms of his, wins above replacement, he could be on that level with other All-Stars. Sure. Whether or not he actually makes the team remains to be seen. And then the other reason that he's the one that I'll kind of be focusing on most is that of the areas where they should improve most this year, corner outfield spots are another one. He's the one that will have the most lasting effect and the most lasting presence. Michael Saunders might have a fantastic year this year, but then he'll probably be gone after this year or after 2018.
Yeah.
So Franco, to me, is much more compelling to actually watch.
Okay, so pitching. And we didn't talk about this, but in spring, they didn't seem to be the best pitching staff other than Jared Eichhoff, who looks like he's in midseason form. But where do you think the Phillies are going to be pitching-wise in 2017? Are we going to see more of the same bunch of number 3, 4 starters, some of them hurt, or are we going to see someone emerge? What's the most likely scenario in your mind?
Something that I think we've forgotten about Aaron Nola is how good he was last season
he was
before
incredible.
He got hurt.
Yeah.
He was incredible. So we've talked about him since he was drafted as probably a mid-rotation starter, a very good starter, an innings eater if he stays healthy, all these things. But the way he pitched last season before the injury was a top-of-the-rotation pitcher. So he's actually my vote. If I have to pick one guy most likely to emerge, it would probably be Nola, assuming he stays healthy.
Okay. As far as the record for the Phillies next year, again, you said that it has to be better than 71-91. Do they get better than 71-91? Are they an 81-win team? Are they more than that? I don't think they are. But are they? I mean, where do you see them finishing?
I don't think they're an 81-win team. I think they're closer to the mid-70s, and I'd be comfortable with that. That's progress. That's a team that is not a complete embarrassment. But I'd say around 75 is where I see them.
Do you need to see J.P. Crawford and or Nick Williams and or Jorge Alfaro and or Roman Quinn make the team and have regular minutes, regular innings by August?
I'd like to see a few people. It doesn't have to be all of them, but you'd like to see at least maybe J.P. Crawford comes up and does well, or Roman Quinn comes up and gets a lot of playing time. But really, more important to me is that whatever level they're playing at, they're doing well, they're improving, they're working on things, they're becoming better players.
Yeah, I think, and if that doesn't all happen, I mean, we talk about the worst case scenario, and to me that's probably the worst case if none of those guys perform well or get hurt or something like that. But even if that doesn't, if all that works like that, they go into next year with a boatload of money, and they can get a couple of free agents and say, okay, we're going to build the other way for a little bit now, or they can figure something out. I think this is now a place where the Phillies have much more flexibility than they've ever had.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why this year has to be one where we start to answer questions. So we know, should we acquire players from outside the organization, or are we set? Can we just fine-tune with free agents, and these guys will be the core that we need them to be?
Right. Well, Dan Walsh, thank you for coming on, and thanks for talking about what we hope to see this year, and hopefully some of those things happen, and hopefully we see some prospects making some strides this year. But, I mean, that's why we're here, I guess. But, Dan, thanks for coming on, and, enjoy the first week of the season, and I'm sure we'll be talking as we get going here and they go to Cincinnati.
All right. Thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks again to Dan Walsh for coming on and talking about the Phillies this week with me. And thanks to Pat Gallen, my guest this week. Awesome to talk with Pat. He's doing some great stuff again at CBS3 Eyewitness News this morning. Watch him in the morning. Also, thanks to bensound.com for the theme music and bumpers. If you would like to contribute theme music and bumpers to our show, please email me at tim@philliesnation.com. Or just message us on Facebook or Twitter or something. Let us know if you have music, because we'd love to have it on the podcast. And if you have any stories about the Phillies that you want to share with us, please email me again at tim@philliesnation.com. You can find the Phillies Nation podcast at iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and at YouTube at Phillies Nation. Find Phillies Nation at Twitter at Phillies Nation, Facebook.com/Phillies Nation, and Instagram at Phillies Nation. And go to PhilliesNation.com this week for the season preview. What's the worst that can happen? What's the best that could happen? The NL East preview, a farm system preview, predictions, and so much more. And Monday, the Phillies begin their 2017 season against the Cincinnati Reds. We will have full court coverage. Even if it's baseball, it's still full court coverage of the Phillies. Plus, so much more. We'll have the Phillies Nation podcast in the morning for your coffee before first pitch. Oh, my goodness. Baseball is here for the Phillies Nation podcast. I am Tim Malcolm. Thanks for coming this week. We'll see you next time.